Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick and Brennan as we break down the Memorial Day weekend for 2019 with the opening of Aladdin, Brightburn, and Booksmart. And, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. Breaking down this week's top 5, and this is a 4-day weekend for Memorial Day. We've got Aladdin opening up at number 1 with 112.7 million domestic, followed by John Wick Chapter 3 in its second week at 31 million domestic. Avengers Endgame in week 5, still hanging on in number 3 at 22.3 million domestic. Detective Pikachu is in the number 4 spot with 17.275 million, and the number 5 is rounded out by Brightburn, debuting at 9.5 million this week. So Aladdin is the winner by a lot. I know it's not a huge surprise. There was a little bit of doubt just kind of how this movie would perform. There hasn't seemed to be as much anticipation as there was for, The Lion King coming out soon. Definitely a much stronger enthusiasm for this movie than I saw around Dumbo. What did you guys think of it?
Yeah, I think that its performance overall was, I don't know where to kind of project this film in terms of opening weekend. I think that you had a lot of negative marketing early on. There was a lot of negative buzz surrounding this film. But kind of as we got closer and closer to its release, things started getting a little bit more positive. I think people were a little bit more open-minded to the idea of this live-action Aladdin. So I think that 112 million over the 4 days, 90 million for its 3 days, that's a pretty strong start for this movie. I think it needed the Memorial Day bump to really make it a success. It opened up to over $200 million worldwide this weekend, so I think it's well on its way to making a good profit. I haven't yet seen the movie. I'm going to be seeing it tomorrow, but I'm hearing mixed things for sure, but I think that this film is definitely going to be one that gets a couple $100 million, does much better than Dumbo. Maybe it's a $500 million picture by the end, but I think this is a pretty good start for them.
Yeah, I think that 500 number is pretty reasonable. I mean, they're probably hoping for that because this budget's 183 million, so it's not cheap. And so if you figure maybe 2.5 times the production budget to earn a profit, that puts it somewhere in the 400 million zone for break even. So yeah, definitely 500 is probably the goal here. And like you said, there's just a lot of different opinions on this movie. I didn't really care for it. It was just a movie that I saw. I feel like I say that a lot, but it's just I had no response to it at all. It didn't excite me. It didn't anger me. It was just a movie that's basically a recreation of many famous scenes from the animated movie. So it's just didn't leave an impression on me. I'm interested to see if that's kind of how a lot of people see it, because it didn't have great buzz like going into this week, as you mentioned before, Brennan. So I'm actually very curious to see what this movie does next weekend for that week-to-week drop, because that could, legs are always important, but I think that's really going to be is really telling for Aladdin. But this movie didn't do much for me, so I'm interested. I think Collin, you were a little higher on this movie than I was.
Yeah, I was a little more optimistic going into it just because I am a pretty big Guy Ritchie fan. I love The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which he did 3 or 4 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And Sherlock Holmes, and just kind of his signature style. And I enjoyed this movie pretty much every time Will Smith was on screen. He's just having fun out there. He does so much for the movie just by being there. And I really liked what they did with Jasmine. I think they could have done it a little bit more elaborately. And her kind of fierce independent woman arc does fall a little bit apart towards the end. But yeah, there's really nothing new here. I think they kind of opened the door for some new stuff, but we're too caught up in just walking down your favorite parts of Aladdin, from the original Aladdin, to really explore all the potential that it had. So I enjoyed it. I don't really love it. I thought it was fine for what it was, but it's never going to be the original. And I still kind of stand by the idea that the only really worthwhile, this is just a good movie in general Disney remake is The Jungle Book. I think honestly, Aladdin might be like my number two, but that's just like the state of the other remakes, not necessarily Aladdin itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like the Kenneth Branagh Cinderella movie as well. I think that movie is really solid. It's from a couple years ago, but yeah, that's so right. I was actually really surprised too that I really liked Will Smith in this movie as well. He's every time he's in the actual blue genie CGI, it's horrifying. It's just really bizarre to look at, and his head's the same size, and he has this really swole neck, and it is weird. I think I had nightmares the night I saw it seeing that. But yeah, he's really good at really entertaining, and there's only so many like energetic people that would work in this role, and I think Will Smith is actually pretty good in it. And his rapport with Mina Massoud is actually really solid. I'm actually really looking forward to see what Mina Massoud does next, because he showed me a little something. I thought he was really charismatic in this movie. But I think it's just this movie. It just kind of it shows how difficult it is to just do these remakes to begin with. You're having so many people that really want it to look like the original and sound like the original and do everything like that. But then there's also people probably like me who probably wanted to do something different, and there's a tough balancing act to do there to really satisfy both parties. So it's tough to pull these movies off, and I think it's just a matter of where you fall in that line of if you just want to see the original again or you just want something different is how you'll feel about this movie. So it's not terrible. Like I said, I just have no response to it and at all. It's a C movie for me. It's just nothing. It's decently produced. It's there. It just exists. And I will say one last thing. What's his name? Is it Billy Magnuson? That isn't his first name?
Yeah.
He is fucking hysterical in this movie. He plays the awkward prince from, I think it's like Scottish, Irish, something weird. But he just has this bizarre accent. You can tell that he's like trying to hold back a laugh as he's talking, and it's really funny. Every time he talks, I like burst out laughing, and so yeah, this movie has its moments, but it's fine. It's whatever.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to highlight quickly about Memorial Day weekend in general for films is that lately I think we're starting to see a trend where the biggest release of the Memorial Day weekend is one that needs the Memorial Day bump. I think last year with Solo, we had a film that had a lot of doubters just because of what was going on behind the scenes, and then also just because of what happened with The Last Jedi, kind of splitting the fandom. I think, and the year before that, we had Pirates of the Caribbean 5, which is a film that personally, as a big Pirates of the Caribbean fan, I didn't really enjoy, and I think that's one that you kind of start seeing the franchise really go downhill in terms of returns on the domestic side of things. So they needed the Memorial Day bump. So I think we're starting to see that sort of thing, because I think with Aladdin, you have a $90 million 3-day take, which is pretty good. But I think if you put this on in a weekend that isn't Memorial Day, I think that this doesn't do as well. So I think we're going to start seeing that trend for the next couple years.
That's interesting, because the year before that was also which movie it was? I just saw it. Oh, it was X-Men Apocalypse, and then the year before that was Tomorrowland. And yeah, it's an interesting little quirk there that I think you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, before we move away from Aladdin a little bit, I do want to commend it, just its kind of dedication to representation. So like this movie entered production a little bit late because they couldn't find Aladdin. Like that was a big struggle for them whenever this was, like a year and a half, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it does bring a group of, Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, Arabic people that don't really have a lot of these big budget movies that represent them. And so it's nice to kind of see that with such a high profile movie. Because there was, it wasn't as pronounced, but there was controversy when the original came out that, it is pretty much a bunch of white people voicing Aladdin and Jasmine and everybody. So it was nice to see that brought to life authentically.
Yep, for sure.
That is interesting. I wonder if that delay in production was part of the reason why this movie is a lot of green screen. I wonder if they didn't have as much time in pre-production because they were so wrapped up in that casting search. But I don't know. That's just something to think about there.
Yeah, this was open call sheet casting for a decent amount of time because they literally could not find somebody.
Yeah.
um, so that was you don't really see that a whole lot with something that this high profile and already had a release date locked down.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of I think pretty much most of what there is to say about Aladdin.
Yep,
So we
I'd
can
agree.
move we can move on into the number 2 spot this week, which is John Wick Chapter 3, which crossed 100 million at the box office this week. As the first Keanu Reeves movie to do so since like I think the Matrix Revelations third one, which is pretty impressive. I did get a chance to see it this week. This movie is insane, and it is worth every minute you spend in that theater.
Oh, I love this movie so much. It is outrageous. Oh my
I
gosh.
just
I can't get
I
enough of it. It's so great.
I love how the the stakes and just the action in every John Wick movie are just upped. Like I think in this movie, Keanu maybe has like 20 lines of dialogue. Like there's just
Yeah.
it starts off fighting, it ends fighting, and about every 15 minutes, Keanu will have like one sentence to say, like "I am," and then he'll just go back to shooting people again.
That is true. There's an inverse relationship between the amount of action in these movies and the amount of words that Keanu Reeves says. It is really funny. Yeah, this movie actually it has already surpassed the international intake from John Wick 2, which is really awesome to see. This movie has made over it's 182 million worldwide, where Chapter 2 was a little over 171. So really good stuff for this franchise as it continues. It was a little steep of a drop this week, even with the 4-day weekend. It's still a 45.4% drop, which isn't ideal, but at this point, I feel like it's all gravy, just because it's already surpassed the second one, and the budget wasn't too much more expensive, and they already greenlit Chapter 4, so we're getting more of this. So really good job by John Wick and just creating this franchise out of nothing, and it'll probably pass 200 million next week. So this is cool. It's a cool success story. I love this movie. The first 30 minutes of this movie are like the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life, and it's amazing. So every ounce or every bit of money that this movie gets is just well earned. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's cool to see another R-rated franchise kind of coming to the forefront and finding a base, keeping that base, and expanding. So I think that's just something else to note.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this franchise has done a really good job of like A, staying consistently good, but B, just like becoming bigger every time. So who knows? Maybe John Wick 4 will outgross Avatar.
Yeah. Does John Wick go to space in the next movie?
When
Oh
John
god.
Wick goes back in time for the time heist, that's when it'll really come together.
Oh gosh. Keanu
So
Reeves, I still Keanu Reeves just can do no wrong to me. It's amazing. I'm sorry, I ruined your segue there, but I love Keanu Reeves. He's the greatest.
no, you're good. I mean, the cool thing about John Wick is that, when they go back in 10 years and they've like finished this saga and do the prequels, Keanu Reeves can still play John Wick because he doesn't age. So there's a
It's
lot of
true.
potential here. But yeah, going back to time heists, Avengers Endgame is still in the top 5 at week number 5 at the box office. It's in third place with 22.3 million, which is still pretty impressive. It's just inching ever so closely to Avatar. It's a little lot, as Brennan's brought up a bunch. This movie is very top heavy, and so it's certainly slowed down quite a bit, but it's still moving a lot better than a lot of the new releases at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, the movie took in another 17 million over the 3 days, 22 million over the 4 days. This is a pretty good weekend for Endgame. Now, as I did say, and as Collin pointed out as well, it is top heavy, right? It is kind of a steep drop in comparison to other MCU movies, or even in comparison to Infinity War. But this movie is still just a massive movie, right? We're approaching $2.7 billion. Avatar is going to be a battle now. I think it's going to be close, in my opinion. I think over the next few weeks, we're really going to see if Endgame can do it or not. It has surpassed 800 million, though, domestically, which is quite a feat on its own. It's going to be kind of a clear and strong second place, because Force Awakens, 936 million domestic record, probably won't be broken for a while. But worldwide, it's going to be interesting these next few weeks to see Endgame kind of creep up to Avatar, and maybe surpass it as we get into the later weeks of June.
Yeah, it needs about another 95-ish million to surpass Avatar, which, I mean, we're at Memorial Day weekend. Kids are starting to get off of school and they'll have more free time on their hands. I could definitely see this movie getting at least another 60 million in its run here in the U.S. At the very least. So I definitely see this record being broken at some point. I think this just has too much going on. I think that drop for this 4-day weekend, it was what, 20-something%. That's just a really solid number for this movie to continue, and it's still playing in over 3,800 theaters. I think this is just, it's slowly creeping, but I think it's going to get there, and maybe by week 8 or week 9.
I'll do my best here with some devil's advocate for you. I think it will be close, just because if you look at kind of this time last year, because Infinity War came out the same weekend of 2018. Infinity War made another 51 million from where it is now to get where it ended up domestically. So, and Endgame is kind of dropping steeper than Infinity War did as a whole. So I think it will be close. And next weekend we're gonna have Godzilla come out. The weekend after that we're gonna see Dark Phoenix come out, which who knows how that's gonna do, but it's definitely gonna kind of draw in some of the comic book crowd. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens for sure. I will still say that it's gonna pass it, but I think it's gonna just pass it.
Yeah, I agree there. It's going to be a couple million at the most. This margin is not going to be very much, but it's just cool to see. We're on the verge of history, brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they'll get it over there if they have to bring it back for Labor Day, which they probably will. They had the big Marvel marathon last Labor Day, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do something kind of like that. But Disney will find a way to get this over. I mean, not that it really matters to them because they own Avatar now, but they'll figure it out. So, yeah, moving on to number 4 is Detective Pikachu with 17.275 million this weekend. Still going pretty well. It's not the monster success that Avengers was. It's not even really as just outright successful as I think Aladdin will end up being. But it's still making decent money. As far as a video game movie goes, this is making really good money. So yeah, there's not a lot to be disappointed with Pikachu's performance.
Yeah, 100%. I think that in the realm of video game movies, this is the most successful in terms of opening weekend last weekend, 2 weekends ago. The movie's just continuing to make its money. It's up to now 357 million worldwide, which is not too bad considering it's $150 million budget. So the movie's going to definitely keep going. I think it'll probably pass 400 million worldwide by the end of its run. I think that's almost kind of in sequel territory. I think we'll probably hear some word of that in the next few months, maybe after this movie hits streaming or home releases and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens, but it's definitely doing good for what it is.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say about this movie, interestingly enough. It's just kind of chugging along. It's doing its own thing. I'm not sure if it still has to open in any international markets, but I think if this movie can get around to like maybe 420 million, right in that range, I think we're definitely in sequel territory. And as you were talking, I could have sworn that they already greenlit a sequel, so I don't know. Maybe it's just too many franchises going through my brain at the moment. But this movie's doing fine. It's doubled its budget and then some, so you can't really complain if you're Warner Brothers and Legendary and Pokemon Company. People are saying it. It's kind of funny. It's just another IP-driven movie that's found its audience, so it's doing okay. It's a pretty decent drop from last week, 31%.
Yep, for sure.
So yeah, and then we'll move on into number 5, which was Brightburn, debuted this week with a little over 9.5 million on a $6 million budget, or an estimated budget, so that's pretty good. This is a superhero movie, but it doesn't have the recognition or a lot of the power behind it that a normal superhero movie would have coming from, Marvel or DC. But it's already outgrossing Hellboy right now, at least for the opening weekend. So,
Oof.
yeah, this is kind of a James Gunn vehicle, but also kind of an anti-Superman vehicle. It's weird to try and decide what box to put this movie in.
Yeah, it's not quite horror, but it is hard. Let me pose a question to you guys. Do you think Brightburn is a weird title? Like, I feel like this movie would have made a lot more money if it was. I don't know what you would name it, but it's just
name it Brandon after the main character.
Yeah, or something. It just people hear Brightburn and are like, what the hell does that mean? But I just like the marketing material of it is like it's from visionary director James Gunn's brother. It's just really funny how they've just plastered James Gunn all over this when he's just producing the movie. But it definitely has a lot of his hallmarks. I'm sure his brothers kind of share the same sentiments as him, where it's in his non-Guardians work. They're all extremely violent and like shockingly violent in places, which this movie is at times. And dark and a little sadistic and twisted. So this movie is interesting. I'm curious to see what it does in the next couple weeks because I think the drop. I could see this definitely dropping similar to like a horror film where it's a little more top heavy, which isn't exactly great for its prospects considering it only opened to 9.5 million. So, but with everything, that 6 million production budget is just saving it because it's already made 17 million worldwide, so it's doing fine. I'm sure they really marketed the crap out of this one with more, like way more than what the production budget is. But this movie's gonna just make its money just because that's a great kind of low risk move to have. So it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean, it is tough. Like, where do you put this movie in kind of in terms of what box you put it in, as you guys are pointing out? I think that as a pure horror film, it does its job. But as an anti-superhero movie, Superman movie, it's pretty interesting because it was so cool when the trailer for this came out, and you kind of instantly know that this is just Superman taking a hard left to the dark side. But it was interesting the way they marketed it. I think maybe a different name could have done, but I don't know what else I'd name it though. I guess that's something you'd have to really brainstorm.
Produced by James Gunn, the movie.
Yeah, that probably would have opened up to numbers similar to this, or if not better. So, but yeah, it's interesting. I know James Gunn and Zack Snyder, they've been friends for a little while, so I wonder if they have talked about this movie at all.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the trailer markets it as, this is the anti-Superman. I think they start to do that in the movie, and they start to see, well, what if, he's being bullied because he's different and all that, and what if he makes the other decisions? But then they just kind of throw that out the window, and they're like, no, hive mind. And it just kind of falls into some alien nonsense. And I feel like they missed a lot of the potential in the movie. And I mean, I am impressed by what they were able to do on such a small budget.
Right.
Like you definitely see they keep the locations and the characters pretty small. Like you never really have more than 2 or 3 people in a scene. But they're able to do a lot with it horror-wise. And so I thought it lived up to my expectations on that end. But as far as like actually seeing out what an anti-Superman would look like, it missed the mark by quite a bit.
Yeah, this movie it's fine in all respects. Personally, like it's never remarkable ever, but it's just incredibly competent in terms of you kind of have good spatial awareness. Characters are drawn out. It moves from beat to beat. It does feel like it has something missing though. It's except for those really out of nowhere shocking moments of just like body horror or just carnage. There's nothing really to hang your hat on with this movie because it's similar to many horror movies where it's like the creepy kid breaks bad, but this time he's just kind of Superman light. So it's just there's nothing too interesting, too deep with what it's talking about. It's just kind of an interesting take, I guess, on all of this, just to kind of capitalize on the superhero craze. So I thought this movie was fine. But yeah, if I had to grade this movie, it would probably be a B minus. Doesn't really, it's like the lowest recommend possible, just because it's just competent and has some interesting moments, and there's nothing that's really horrendous in this movie at all. It's just kind of there at a lot of parts, and pretty generic in a lot of moments with character beats and just parenthood type of things. I'm just probably not going to remember this movie kind of quickly, and that feels like that's kind of a missed opportunity, because I feel like this could have been like the breakout indie-ish hit of the summer if it was more competently produced, or if there was like a certain wow factor to it. So I feel like this movie might disappear rather quickly.
Yeah, I'd agree. I just don't see it lasting very long. And I think it's kind of going to end up like Pet Sematary was. Pet Sematary, there was a decent amount of hype around it, I guess. But yeah, just debuted and dropped off the map. And I feel like Brightburn is probably going to do kind of the same. I mean, it's already made back its production budget. So, it's going to be not a huge success, but a decent success. So it definitely leaves room for sequels. I just don't know if it'll get any.
Yeah, I don't either. It's a moderate missed opportunity, like I mentioned before. There's a lot of room here that it could have explored that it just never really did, and that's just kind of a bummer to see sometimes, because this is a pretty neat little premise. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. We'll see, but it's just it's fine. I got nothing else to say.
One thing I did notice today, watching Endgame again with my family, is the kid who plays Brightburn is when Ant-Man becomes a kid, it's the same actor. So little shared universe connection there.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
It's funny.
I'm kind of picturing that now. Yeah, you're right. Oh wow.
So yeah. I think that kind of wraps up this Memorial Day weekend. Brennan, I know you wanted to talk about some of the previous Memorial Day weekend successes and failures we've had.
Oh yeah, well, as I just said earlier, I think it's just important to highlight that it seems like it is these movies that need a little bit of that extra help, as I stated. Like Solo last year, some of the lead up to it was a little bit negative, so they needed that Memorial Day bump. I think Aladdin is definitely the same, and I am interested to see next year if kind of the same sort of thing happens with whatever becomes a Memorial Day weekend release next year. But I think with Aladdin, that they're happy with what they did this weekend for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think Disney's still got 2 other live action remakes coming up this year, so they've got plenty of room on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. That kind of wraps up the top 5, and then moving into another debut this week was Booksmart. It didn't crack the top 5, got pretty close to Brightburn, but ended up around 8.69, almost 8.7 million. And so it's not been a huge success so far. But I've seen the movie. Everyone I've talked to who's seen the movie has loved it. I think it's really smart. It weirdly presents a lot of high school movie stereotypes, but also breaks them at the same time. And I just thought it was a phenomenal movie, especially for Olivia Wilde's directorial debut.
Yep, I love this movie. This is probably going to be one of my favorites of the year. It's hilarious. I can't remember the last time I laughed this hard at a movie. Really, really great. And between this and for Olivia Wilde, she came out with a movie a couple months ago. I don't know if either of you guys have seen it. It's called A Vigilante, where she's in it, and it's kind of like a good dramatic turn for her, where she kind of plays. I guess she's a vigilante, is the title, but she's kind of just goes around and helps women who were affected by abuse because her husband was abusive in the past. So it's really well done. So between that and Booksmart, this is like a new chapter in Olivia Wilde's career, which is really cool to see. I really would have liked to see this movie break into the top 10. I think just a lot of studios around Hollywood were pretty interested to see how Booksmart would do, because they kind of want to make more of these movies where it's just kind of a fun comedic romp from start to finish with some heart and We don't get a lot of movies like this anymore, which is interesting. Um, my mind immediately went to Superbad, which I think is a pretty stereotypical comparison there because it's a high school all in one night movie type of thing. But back in those days, back in was that a decade ago or something like that, where it just seemed like movies like this were coming out all the time. So I really would have liked to see this movie do better. All three of us couldn't find production budget numbers on this movie, so we don't know if it's outpacing its production budget or where it is in comparison to that. So I really hope that this movie has a decent drop to week drop to drop. So I don't know. I think it's to be determined with this movie, and I really hope it does better because I really love it.
Yeah, I think if it has a decent drop, I think next weekend it can make a decent chunk of change because next weekend there isn't really something like this coming out. So I think definitely next weekend is kind of the time where this movie should probably get just a respectable drop, make a little bit more cash, and turn a solid profit. And then we'll see how it does also when it debuts in foreign markets because it didn't get a day and date release and it didn't come out everywhere at the same time. It's just mainly here in North America right now. So we'll see kind of what happens as in the next few weeks as it opens up in foreign markets as well. We'll see how it plays out there. But I think at this point, I think they're a little bit upset with how it turned out. But as we said, we don't know the production budget exactly, so we'll see how it progresses on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to see this be a huge success, but unfortunately, it just hasn't quite pulled that yet. And I mean, if we had budget, it put it in a little bit more perspective. But yeah, it's hard to get a beat on the legacy of this movie at this point. I thought it was, I thought it was great. I know the general opinion around it has been that this movie is great. So I really hope that it has a lasting legacy.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to find its audience at some point, whether that's in theaters or or outside when it hits streaming or anything like that. Because it's very accessible. It's just a really fun kind of 2019 look at crazy high school movies with really great cast, really interesting, and just really funny. And like, yeah, my theater was howling when I saw this movie. So I think it's just a matter of getting the word out. So hopefully this podcast does something for that. But I think this movie is gonna have its devoted fans. I hope that it's a little bigger than it is right now. So yeah, we'll see. Interesting to see in future weeks.
Yeah, when this becomes a success, I really hope Olivia Wilde gives us a shout out because
I actually have her on speed dial, guys. We can get her on the podcast.
Oh, well, yeah, I feel like that's our next step for next week.
Yeah, we can ask her about the change up. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Cowboys and Aliens. Was she?
Oh man, yeah, she was in that movie. Tron Legacy. Just rehash all the old memories.
Yeah. Man, next weekend is definitely going to be a very fun one, though, in terms of box office numbers. With some major releases, we're going to see Godzilla King of the Monsters come out, which is shamelessly my number one most anticipated film of 2019. I'm pretty hyped. We're also going to see Rocket Man next weekend, which is R-rated, I'm pretty sure. So it's not going to pull Bohemian Rhapsody numbers, but this should still be a pretty good success worldwide. We're also going to see Ma come out next weekend, which is something that I am actually quite excited for.
Me too.
And it's kind of becoming a meme right now. And I think that's definitely going to help drive its box office numbers next weekend. I'm pretty hyped because I think that it could turn out to be a fun horror film, and it's cool to see Octavia Spencer kind of branching out or trying this role. So I'm quite hyped for all three movies next weekend.
I think that I'm actually really looking forward to Ma. It's really weird. First time I saw that trailer, I thought it looked really, really stupid. But I've kind of, like you said, I'm into the memes. Memes are my life. And Octavia Spencer is just doing weird things in this movie. Where she's like cutting people's dicks off or sewing their mouths shut. I don't know. It just looks crazy. I feel like it's going to be one of those movies where horror fans just love it because it's just so deranged, and then it'll have its audience if it's even remotely done well. So But yeah, that's going to be third next week. There's no question that Rocket Man and Godzilla are going to kind of lead the way here. I am interested to see what Rocket Man does, and I'm interested to see what you have to say, Colin, because I think this movie that has the potential of being a breakaway hit that just stays in theaters for forever, kind of like what The Greatest Showman did, where it doesn't necessarily open really, really high, but people just keep going to see it. The week-to-week drops are just incredibly low. So that could something that I'd be interested to see. And I think Paramount really needs this movie to do well because they're struggling. But yeah, I'm really interested. This is gonna be fun.
This is actually my most anticipated movie for next week is Rocket Man. I'm not like a huge Elton John fan, but I mean I like his music. Grew up with it, and I'm just excited to see Taron Egerton take a crack at it. You know, they've got Elton John's endorsement behind this one, which was kind of what was missing from Bohemian Rhapsody is the remaining members of the band weren't completely on board with a more in-depth look at themselves. Focus was kept more on Freddie. And so I'm excited to see this movie not pull its punches, which most of the early reactions I've heard so far have kind of said this is what separates it out. And yeah, I think this will kind of click in the same way that Bohemian did or the Greatest Showman did, and people just like going to go listen to music they listened to as a kid.
Yeah, I think I really like the idea of because there's just been so many band biopics. You know, Bohemian Rhapsody, and we had The Dirt on Netflix earlier this year, which apparently no one liked. But now we have this. But I really like the idea of this being a fantastical look where it's all his songs kind of break out into these crazy dance numbers and just magical, just like some type of like real like surrealism type of element to it, which seems really fun. I think that's a really cool way just to kind of just differentiate this from the rest of these same movies out there.
Yeah, and I think also the fact that Taron Egerton is singing. He's actually going to be singing in this, which is, I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm quite sure that he's actually singing.
Yeah,
in this
he
film.
is.
Yeah, so that really blew me away when I found that out, and I think that definitely bodes well for him as the year progresses. We'll see what happens. I'm pretty excited for this film overall, though. I'd like to see a cool blend of biopic and musical, so it should be really, really interesting, and I'm definitely excited to see it.
Yeah, and I've talked about it in private with you guys before. I don't know if I've actually gone too in depth into it on the podcast, but my expectations for Godzilla just aren't that great. I really think we're going to be looking at like a Transformers Dark of the Moon here, just with giant monsters instead of giant robots. I would love for this to be great, but I don't know. I think it's going to miss the mark again.
They're bringing back the theme from the old Toho Godzilla films, so I'm hyped. So here we go.
Colin, did you see an IMAX preview of this movie? It was like a 5-10 minute clip or something like that from it.
Yeah, it was basically like an extended version of the trailer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd honestly forgotten I'd seen that. Yeah.
I can't believe I remember
I didn't
that
remember
either.
what movie it was in front of. Yeah, it was
Shazam, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was probably Shazam. And it's more of like them actually going to wake up Godzilla, and so they don't show you just the really cool part outside of what you've already seen in the trailers. But yeah, I just kind of got the vibe that they're missing the mark of, kind of rooting it into a sensical story, and they're just going to try and throw as many monsters at you as they can.
Well, I think they're probably gonna. We'll see what happens. I think the marketing material has been great, in my personal opinion. I think the way they're, just the visuals look incredible. I think that the monsters in general just look great because they're not really. I mean, they are monsters, but they're really treating them like truly unworldly beings. In the trailers, like they're the music they use, even just the piano riffs, like they're kind of treating it like it's a beautiful spectacle. But I mean, you look back in the 2014 Godzilla, the first entry in this MonsterVerse. That's a film that, while it got mixed reviews from critics, some liked it, some didn't, and from fans, most fans kind of wanted to see more Godzilla. Maybe they're going to go completely off the deep end and just give us all of Godzilla and not really hold back like they did in the first one.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when I saw the first movie, or I guess the 2014 version, not the first one, because there's been 5 billion Godzilla movies, but like just all I remember from that movie is One is Aaron Taylor Johnson being boring, and then two, just Godzilla's atomic breath, which was like the greatest thing ever. And I think I almost just like shit my pants watching that in the theaters. That was like the coolest thing I've ever seen. So if there's just more of that, if there's just crazy monster action, I mean, this is one of the few things like these Godzilla and these crazy monster movies. This is one of the few where I'm just like, I don't care about story or interpersonal connection. Just give me ridiculously awesome action and really cool spectacle. And if everything around that is like fine, if it just works, if it's just coherent, then I'm typically okay with these type of things, because I don't know, I don't go to Godzilla King of the Monsters for for Oscar-winning drama. So
Yeah.
so I don't know. I just want to see stupid things just smash into each other for 2 hours, and I'll be satiated.
I also
Yeah,
want to point out. Oh yeah, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, I'm all for that, and like I'm down to watch monsters punch each other and be entertained. I'm just kind of afraid it'll be pretentious, where like kind of like Transformers, and unfortunately that's what I'm going to compare it to until I see it. Where they think they're being really profound, or like no, I'm going to compare it to Justice League. That's where I'm going with this. Where
Oof.
you know the people behind it are just like, yeah, we made this really thought-provoking Godfather of monster movies, and it's just a chaotic mess. So I'm hoping to be wrong about this. I'm gonna watch the remake Godzilla tonight. I haven't seen that one since it came out like 5 years ago, so maybe that'll get me more excited and more invested in it. But for now, I'm being pretty apprehensive about it.
I mean, I think that it's all leading up to next year with Kong v Godzilla. We're finally going to see that. So that's gonna be the pretentious one.
Yeah, I did enjoy Kong Skull Island for what it was.
Yeah, I think that was more of a just mindless action film. That was just a fun movie to watch overall.
It's Jurassic Park, but with a giant ape.
Yeah, and also I
Whatever
want to point out just for you guys, if you guys, anyone with a Snapchat, there's a Ma filter now. I believe that you can set up the filter where Ma comes up and it looks like you're on FaceTime with her. So that's something that you don't want to miss out.
That's creepy. I don't like that. I'm not going to be on Snapchat for the next week. Thank you, Brennan.
Yeah, I just deleted it from my phone. Thanks a lot.
God damn, that's weird. First we have the boy girl filter, then we have the baby filter, and then we have this. Like, Snapchat, you gotta relax a little bit. You're doing the most, and you're at like a 12. We need you at like a 3 or 4. This is a little ridiculous.
There's the fat fuller filter. That's what I want. So yeah, that kind of wraps up everything going on at the box office over Memorial Day weekend. Next weekend again should be pretty competitive. We'll kind of see what Aladdin's overall run is going to look like with a little bit more clarity next week, just as it comes face to face with Godzilla's supposed to be a pretty big blockbuster. So there's a lot of competition coming up. Thanks for listening to this episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. Again, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. And join us next week as we break down the opening weekend of Godzilla, King of the Monsters, as well as Rocket Man and Maz.